Megan? Brian? Brooks? Rob? Alyssa? Mike? And Barb.
Here. Okay, we've got a quorum. We'll move on to the agenda. Any changes, or else I'll entertain a motion for the agenda.
No, motion to approve.
Toad second.
Motion is second to approve the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, and then we've got the consent calendar, several different plats. We just need a motion to accept those.
I'd bring motion to approve.
Bassett, I'll second.
Motion is second to approve the consent calendar. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, then we've got the minutes on page 14 and 15. We don't have our proofreader here tonight, so I hope you guys have looked them over. Anything need to be changed, or can we have them approved?
Bassett, I'll motion to approve.
Toad second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All in favor? Opposed? All right, now we have time for public comments. Sir, are you here to address a specific issue? Okay, so you're not here for public comments. Okay. And the room is surprisingly empty tonight. Okay, so I don't think we have any other public comments. All right, we will move on to then number 7. Welcome. We're going to have you come up and just kind of state your case if you push the little button there and give us your name and address, please.
Edward Anderson, 708 South 4th Circle in Brandon, 57005. Okay, give me 60 seconds. So again, I'm Edward Anderson. I'm originally from Dallas, Texas. My wife and I relocated about 2.5 years ago to Connecticut because one of our twin daughters wanted to attend UConn. Of course, once we were there 1 year, she transferred to Boston University. We had no reason to stay there any longer. I love those kids. In any case, we decided we loved Texas, but we didn't want the hot weather. So we said, well, let's make a transition where we can get out of these high taxes, maybe have some less heat. We chose Brandon. We found a home here, the Oakland home builders built. Came and looked at it, looked nice, and we bought it. So we're really happy to be here. we sure enjoy it. And my background is my wife and I both went to SMU. I've got 2 degrees from SMU. Traveled to 35 countries. I'm an Eagle Scout. I've been a long-time firearms enthusiast. And I was a previous FFL in Dallas for 3 years. The only reason I didn't renew is because we just happened to be leaving to Connecticut at that point. And in Connecticut, the gun laws aren't so friendly, and I just didn't want to mess with it there. In any case, my intention to come here tonight is simply to request from the zoning committee to operate a small, legally compliant firearms sales business from their residential address in accordance with all federal, state, and local laws. I am and will be again a licensed dealer. The ATF's already come to my house, so everything's fully functioning from there if it's approved tonight. As far as clientele, I only sell to clients who are pre-approved with concealed carry permits, so no one just shows up that we don't know who they are. Secondly, there's no walk-ins or general public access. It's by appointment only. Very low traffic. I see probably 4 clients a month. It's 1 a week. As far as transactions, 30 minutes max, in and out. As far as parking, they park in my driveway. Again, 30 minutes in and out would not be in any sort of issue as far as traffic, parking, mobility, anything like that. As far as firearms, only firearms, no ammunition or anything else, just simply the firearm itself. It's a nice benefit to local residents if you're interested in an easy firearms transaction. As far as inventory, signage, things like that, you wouldn't see anything from the streets. Everything's secured and safe, so there's no access for anyone else except me. And no one would know that it's anything except my home unless I invite you to come over. All sales are recorded and traceable as required by law, like I've done before. We follow, of course, all the rules, and if a local neighbor was interested in obtaining a firearm, I'd be more than happy to run the NICS, the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, and make it an easy process for them as well. Happy to answer any questions.
questions, most specifically to monetary transactions. So are you technically selling the guns, or are these online purchases where the customer purchases the gun, has it shipped to you for the background check and transaction service?
Both are options. The customers have the option to use me as their transfer agent, so they could literally pay for the gun and then have it shipped to me. I run the background check, they can come and pick it up. Or I can carry an inventory. I typically don't carry more than just a few guns in stock at any time, because guns, just like anything else, are very personal. It's like buying a pair of shoes. You know what you want, usually go find it, and then that's what you want. So I don't find having a lot of inventory is beneficial.
You also mentioned that you were dealing only with concealed carry clientele.
For any advertising that goes out onto the internet or anywhere else, if someone called me and asked me to run any sort of transaction on their behalf, I would ask that they're a concealed carry permit holder to complete the transaction. There's 3 levels in the state of Connecticut. One's very easy to get. And they just have to have been a resident for 30 days previously. If you'd like, I'd be happy to go through, what that encompasses. There's about 10 steps to make sure they have a clear background.
So I don't know anything about this process, but I'm just curious, why would someone prefer to come to you for your service rather than, say, just go to Shields downtown? What's the difference, of personal service?
There's a few different things, right? Some people just like the aspect of it. Some people don't want to drive to Shields. Somebody on my street, I've already had multiple neighbors come up and say, I can't wait, I'm going to start shipping guns to you, so I can literally walk 2 doors down and pick them up. It's just convenience. Plus, I don't have any overhead. I don't have to mark my guns up much. I just do it because I like it. You wouldn't believe how many great people you meet.
I guess one of my concerns is we kind of have a no retail out of the home as number G on our ordinance says, unless expressly permitted by a conditional use permit, no retail services or retail sales are permitted from the site other than incidental sales related to services. You don't really have a service that you're providing, it's just sales, right?
Correct.
We've kind of been.
You're providing the FFL transaction as a service, though.
That's.
Not-
Let me clarify. You can't buy a gun unless you go to a location where they are FFL certified. And so Shields, of course, is an FFL. I am an FFL, for example. So they have their choice as to where they come. Now, what is the service I provide? That is the service. Am I, opening a retail store where people can walk in from 9 to 5 every day? No, it's not that.
Because you also run the background checks,
That's correct.
so that's the service side of what you do.
Correct. But if they have the concealed carry permit, then I don't have to run a background check.
But it still has to go through an FFL,
Correct.
which is a service.
It's a very interesting system. The gun makers have to then sell to a distributor, which is very interesting. Then they're traced to us and then to the consumer.
Would you be okay with conducting this business without having inventory on hand?
I don't see why not.
I guess where our concern is as Mr. Totes mentioned, is the retail side of it. We don't want to open up that have an inventory, and it's basically the service of the FFL transaction service, the background checks, and providing the service. It's not, I wouldn't consider it technically a retail.
Right.
You know, especially if they're purchasing the guns online and you're just the middleman. That
Right.
that to me is a service and not sales.
Of course, if you have no problem with me advertising that I'm available for people to use me, I think then
No,
that's
that's
a fair blend.
You know, and probably just for the record, in case somebody's watching this, you know, on TV after the fact, you know, you could do this out of your home, regardless of coming here. The only reason you have to come here is because you want to make money doing it. But you can do this free of charge for your neighbors. You can do it free of charge for your friends, for your family, for anybody that comes in. And there's nothing we can do here. It's just that you want to charge for your service.
Yeah, you're right. And it's a very low impact. Just so you know, I typically charge about $30 for the service. I think that's lower than you'd find just about anywhere. Like I said, I like to do it because I meet great people. It's a lot of fun, and it's to me, it's an interesting hobby.
Other questions? Comments? I find it very interesting how you found your way to Brandon, but welcome. We're happy to have you.
I think we found it interesting as well.
Have you lived through a winter yet?
Well, I mean, we got here in November, so sort of.
Well, I guess I'll make a motion to approve the conditional use, provided on two conditions. Number one, that there's no inventory maintained within the premises for retail sales, and number two, that the product goes out the door in the same packaging that it is delivered to you in. That it's not taken out of the box,
Well, I do have to take it out so I can read the serial
Yeah.
numbers. Yeah,
but that it goes back out the door
it goes
in
yeah,
the same
it goes-
packaging
exactly.
that it's delivered to you.
Bassett, I'll second the motion.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second to approve the conditional use. Any more comments from the right side of the table? Over there, guys. Anybody? Anything? We're a little light on the left side today. Okay. Yeah, yeah. She's a retired police officer, so I think she can hold her weight. Okay, let's vote then. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, you are good to go with those conditions. Hey, thank you.
Welcome to Brandon.
Yep. Got a rezone on Park Street. Cell tower guy.
So this is a lot owned by Alliance. It's just north of Robert Bennis. It's right next to the city's detention pond. Alliance has requested that it be rezoned from NRC to general business. The reason stated on the application is to allow the possible future construction of a cell tower, which is a conditional use in the GB district. So that's not, for anyone watching later, that's not a guarantee. Of course, this is not the conditional use public hearing. This is just a rezone to potentially allow the conversation should the rezone go through. What it would do is open up the list of uses allowed in general business for that lot. And cell tower is one of the conditional uses.
Yep, I'm Jonas Snyder from 5313 South Eastwind Avenue, Sioux Falls. Thanks for having me. I don't think probably this is any big new surprise for anybody. We've talked about this for quite a while, but if you have any questions or anything for me about the request to rezone to general business, I'm happy to answer them.
So since this is a rezone, this is the entire lot controlled by Alliance. There's no other action here. There's no platting, so it's the entire lot,
Correct.
obviously. Okay.
It's a very small lot. I forget the dimensions. We'll click on it and find out real quick. It is 0.14 acres.
And then the rest of that area would stay, is it NRC, is that what it is?
So the detention pond is the city, so that's probably either NRC or institutional. I don't know if we've rezoned it yet. And the lot immediately to the east is owned by Minnehaha County Community Water Corp. And I believe that's also NRC, and that would stay the way it is currently, unless they wanted to rezone it and came in.
Totes, I'll make a motion to approve the rezone to general business.
No, second.
Okay, it's been a long process, right? Got a motion and a second to rezone to general business. Any more discussion? Jonah's gonna have some free nights here.
Well, this isn't the last you're going to see him. He'll be back for the conditional use at some
Okay.
point.
City council public hearing is on Monday as well.
Yep.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right,
Thank you so much.
you're welcome. Thanks for coming. Really? We're talking about decks?
So I expected Nick Van Overshield to be here, but I do not see him, so I will do my best to present what he wanted presented. So down in Chestnut Ridge, they are working on constructing a whole lot of townhouses. We are currently going through the process at the city level of allowing open, unenclosed, and uncovered decks or hard surface patios less than 12 inches in height above grade to extend to the common wall side lot lines of a single-family attached house. He has a situation out there where the topography kind of slopes downwards on a hill. That's the rough drawing he submitted if you'd like to see. But his request is that would you all consider an additional exception to allow a covered deck, not necessarily an enclosed deck, just a deck with a roof over it, taller than 12 inches in height above grade, as an exception to be allowed into the setback?
Basically, what he's explaining was, sometimes this may be okay, this becomes problematic, the way the grade is. One big building, potentially, four townhomes, and as you get down there, these decks very well could be over 12 inches. And, so he's having a hard time structurally and design-wise accomplishing it. But, this would be citywide, it would be approved not only for Chestnut, but
So just so I understand, when we talked about this originally, we were talking about situations like row housing and expanding the decks basically to go to property line for an interior lot, property line to property line.
Correct.
Or an
That
exterior
is
lot to go from the common property line to the setback on the non-common side, and now they want to apply this to a covered deck. They
taller
want
than
covered decks
12
also
inches in
include-
height above grade.
I guess my question is, why would that not already be allowed? Wouldn't a covered deck fall under the same criteria as the primary structure? So if the primary structure can span on an interior lot, common property wall to common property wall, why would we not allow a covered or an enclosed deck to also span interior property line to interior property line? What differentiates a covered deck from a screen porch, from a 3-season porch to an enclosed porch? To me, when you roof over it, you know, kind of like the building code, if you put an overhang or a canopy or an unenclosed space under a roof, it becomes part of the structure according to the IBC and requires that to be sprinkled if the primary structure also is required to be structured. So from a building code, it's considered part of the building.
Correct.
Not a deck or not a patio.
Correct. Right now, we would treat it as part of the principal structure, and it would have to meet the setbacks as the principal structure. What they are asking for is to allow that to extend. Most likely, where it'll impact is the rear yard setback. The rear yard setback. They want a covered deck to extend likely into the rear yard setback, as well as the sides.
I think we've already addressed that on several variance requests in the past year. I thought we were talking about the side yards because the memo was
It would be,
about,
yes, it would be both. It would be, that section relates to both the rear and the side. So, yes, I should have written the memo more clearly. It applies to both the rear and the sides. So they are looking potentially to allow a deck with a roof into the side and rear yard setbacks, whereas the principal structure would not be.
So you've got this under like discussion items, so if we were interested in doing that, it could be incorporated into,
It would have to be a new amendment because 731 is already well on its way. City Council has a second reading on Monday.
I guess I'm not as concerned with the side setback as I am the rear setback. I think if it's covered and you're going into the rear setback, that's, you know, you kind of start affecting that space. And if it was an uncovered patio, I can see where you have grade that you're trying to work with, and you have attached units where the patios could start getting above 12 inches. And if we said, you know, if it's less than 12 inches at the principal structure, but as you go out, you know, up to, you know, 10 feet or 12 feet or whatever we wanted to say, but if we went out to a certain distance and it, because of grade, it exceeded the 12 inches, I could see where we might make an exception for that, but I want to put a limit to how far we allow that patio, if it's 10 feet or 12 feet, because we wouldn't want to say it's okay to extend if it's out of the principal, you know, you get a 20-foot patio and then all of a sudden you could really get out there. So I'm kind of thinking that if we did want to say for uncovered patios, but set a limit on how far it could be from the principal structure, as long as it's within the 12 inches at the principal structure. That's kind of what I'm thinking, I guess.
Yeah, currently patios, which would be, you know, obviously less than 12 inches, can be within 5 feet of a rear, 5 feet of a side. The raised deck over 12 inches, I think there have been years long ago where the zoning code here in Brandon allowed for a deck that would be a normal sized deck, maybe 10 feet off the ground, 8 feet, to be maybe within 5 feet of the property line. I think that was a little intrusive for you to be able to be that high up and looking down on your neighbor's property, so that when it's the deck, then covered or not covered, you have to be 25 feet, so you're given that buffer.
But I could see a situation where, because of grade, you can't keep that 12 inches up to the 5 feet, but you know, but that might still be okay if it's only a 10-foot patio. Grade could affect it, but it's probably not gonna be so high that, you know, I mean, it could be really steep too, and it could be intrusive too, so. But if we did wanna look at that, I would certainly put a limit on how big the patio is.
But even if the patio with grade, it's always just gonna be so high off the ground, cause the ground, it's gonna go with the ground. So it would go down with the ground or go up with the ground. You know, it's so many inches off the ground, easily 4 or 5 inches, so the depth. I'm trying to visualize your scenario.
I mean, you could have a flat patio, and you could have grade, and so if you wanted to have a flat patio and build it up so that it stayed flat and the grade went down, you could get more than 12 inches at the end of it. But if it's, you know, at grade at the primary structure or whatever. But if you kept it flat, but the grade went down, and you're trying to keep that flat, but still want to have that extend into the setback a little bit, I could see a scenario where we might say that that's okay, but I would put some limits on it.
Yeah, I have difficulty with the other part of it, the talk about the, whatever, a covered deck or a roof or being, because it's just a very different scenario, and I know we spent our time specifically talking about these low 12-inch or less from the grade patios, which is, to me, just much more, once it has a roof on it, it's such a structure, it's a very different conversation. It's so much more impactful to separation and just setbacks and even aesthetics and just obtrusiveness to neighbors, so I have trouble with the roof part.
Yeah, I agree. You know, when you start to put a roof on something, that to me, that should fall on, anything with a roof over it should fall within the building setback limits. Now, we've had people come in with decks that they want to move into the setback, and we've, even with an uncovered deck, we've hesitated to allow that. So I don't know why we would want to get more lenient with a covered deck than when we've already taken a pretty hard stance on the uncovered decks.
I agree with, certainly with the rear setback, with the cover deck. I'm not as opposed to getting into the side setbacks on attached, especially if it's new construction and that's the design and they all have covered patios. I'm not sure that adding a covered patio in the setback is something we would necessarily want to do, but on new construction, I don't necessarily have as much problem with that because that's part of the design and that's what people are buying, and it's not getting into the rear setback. I wouldn't have a problem on the side setbacks as much as I would with the rear. The rear, I don't think that's a good idea.
So, where this becomes an issue with some builders is it starts out as one lot and they build a building, and of course they build the decks right up to each other. Then they wish to subdivide. Well, we can't approve a plat if it creates a nonconformity, which if they built the deck right up to currently the side lot, either one, the side or the rear, whatever they want to do, that would, and that's the language we're trying to fix with open, unenclosed, and uncovered, but some do build them with the roof, and that's the situation where they run into trouble, and that might be the situation here, where their plan is ultimately to subdivide off units, and that would prevent it if they added decks that would be, if you, the side yard wise, would be compliant now, but if it was subdivided, then you would have the 5 feet and 5 feet because it's covered.
I guess I'm confused. Why would that not be allowed? If there's a property line going between two units, the primary structure can abut each other right up to the property line. Why can a covered deck not do the same thing? I don't see anywhere in our ordinance that
If
says
it was
it can't.
within the setbacks, yes. The current language is that that's being fixed for paved patios less than 12 inches height above grade that are open, unenclosed, uncovered. Must be a distance of at least 5 feet from adjacent side or rear lot line. So that's what we are trying to fix.
Sorry, where are you? What section are you reading that from, Patrick? So I can
15,
follow.
16, 3E.
Okay, let me get to that, please.
Yep.
Okay. 1516.3E.
Yes. So the current 731 going through the process seeks to eliminate that must be 5 feet from the adjacent side lot line where it's single family attached.
Right, but if it's a covered deck, doesn't that fall under the same setback requirements as the primary structure itself? Because we give leniency to uncovered decks.
Yep.
So in my mind, my interpretation, a covered deck falls under the same stipulations and the same requirements as the building itself.
So you would have a
Attached,
zero lot line.
I agree with that. You are correct.
Zero setback on the side yard or an attached.
Correct. The issue then would come from if they wanted to project out. Correct. Correct. So, I think it's nice when the applicants here because they understand their situation. I'm running off of about a 10-second conversation, but yes, I think their initial plan was to have the patio in the setback, but wanting to put a covering over it. But I really wish the requestee was here.
Yeah, I don't think that we want to be going into the rear setback though with covered decks or patios.
I would agree.
I guess in my mind, a covered patio is no different than an enclosed porch, is no different than a 3-season porch. Once you put a roof on it, to me, it falls under the same guidelines, the same restrictions as the primary structure itself.
And the effect on the property, the adjacent property, if you have a house that's built up to the rear setback, with a patio, your covered patio, you're saying, well, we're bringing that principal structure back and leaving that patio. That's not affecting negatively the neighbor. I don't see how. So I agree. I just wouldn't go in the rear setback on that.
So are we saying that if he wants to pursue this, he needs to bring it forward again and be here? Is that what we're saying? Or we're saying no, we're not interested in doing this at all?
But you say the board at this point would not have any opposition to a side yard, but not a rear yard infringement.
If the ordinance allows two dwelling units to be constructed on right up against the same property line. I don't see why we wouldn't also allow a covered patio, or sorry, a covered deck, a three-season patio, a screen patio to also be constructed up to that same property line. Obviously, you'd still, if you had an enclosed attic space, you'd still have to have a fire rating between the two if they're on a common property line, but. Because to me, it really comes down to then you start to need to define how do you limit the enclosure between the upper and lower plane? Does it have to be open air? Can you put screens in it? Can you put windows in it, but not insulated? You know what I mean? At some point, you would have to define.
I don't think this particular one is gonna be a problem.
Could we get a microphone so it picks up the conversation?
So if you on that deck, and then you can see, when you're in your house, you can't really see across. Here, you can maybe, you'd be above them, and you'd be looking down on your neighbor's property, and they could be, I'm just thinking about the visibility piece, and that's why I think we've always considered to be, you need that separation. Just like we mentioned a few minutes ago, you want to have a deck that's tall and so close to your neighbor that you're looking down on their property.
I mean, you see a lot of apartments where they share the same deck, where you have an apartment unit here, and then they build a deck between them. Okay, so they both go out onto the same deck structure. They build a visual barrier between them, and then they stack them vertically. And so, to me, if you're doing row houses, you could simply do the same thing.
And I do see, I know Sioux Falls and T, I just did a townhouse in T that had a covered patio in the back on the property line. So I know that it happens in other places, so I don't have as much problem on the side setback as I do the rear setback.
Ownership to me. You're the visual.
I think, in my opinion, I think that application that we're discussing still meets with the spirit of the conjoined housing issue that we were talking about, but as long as we're talking about the side setback, not encroaching on a rear one, that's to be protected. And I guess there are situations when you're building in many facets where there are times when the way neighborhoods develop, the way the topography is, that there are some houses that are going to be above and have different views. It's not ideal, but that's can't always be remedied or avoided.
Yeah, and Paul, now that I think about it a little bit more, I kind of see what you're talking about. So, for example, if you had two houses that were offset like this with a common property line, you couldn't have a window looking down into your neighbor's property because that would have to be a fire rated wall. I guess I was thinking just, grade level type units, but yeah, I guess I can see if you're up on a second story, you can look right down into your neighbors.
He said that we're talking about is prevalent in Sioux Falls. That doesn't mean we have to go with Sioux Falls. I'm just on the table. You know, I think we've all seen different environments and different building things, so.
So what do you want from this group?
Basically, if that is something you are interested in pursuing or not, we can work on some language. If you aren't interested in making a broad statement in the code and want to handle it through variance, that's one thing. Or if you think it's a common enough issue that it is something to be addressed, we can do that as well. Or if you think it's not something you want to do, you can certainly do that as well.
Well, I guess if our interpretation tonight is that we do allow a covered deck or patio on the shared wall setback, and we don't seem like we're very interested in extending that into the rear setback. If that works for the builder, I don't know that there's a lot more to address. I think we kind of have a consensus that we're not interested in going to the rear setback, but if the builder really needs that, they would probably have to come and make an argument for that.
Is that the consensus of the group?
Yeah, I agree with them.
Would it be possible that if they're within the setback, that they have to construct a rated wall? No different than if it was part of the primary structure. And then that wall would obviously prohibit any openings.
Projections and openings, yes.
Right. And then that would eliminate the visual barriers, or, looking down into the neighbor's property.
Tying in the building code to the zoning code.
But wouldn't they argue that that's going to increase the cost or not?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, it's one thing when you go out and you build them all from scratch. But what happens when the builder walks away, they sell them all, and then you have people that own their individual units, and somebody wants to add something onto the back. It's one thing to go in and buy something and know what you're buying, but then when your neighbor changes something, and they build a covered deck, so you're sitting out in your backyard, and all of a sudden, your neighbor is right up there, right on the property line, 8 feet above you, and you bought your house, and you're like, well, that wasn't there when I bought my house. But
You got what you need, or?
Yep, I think so.
Okay. Moving on to interstate signage overlay, page 33.
So, this is the second meeting I think we've looked at a draft. So, the language there right now is you would draw lines from 1,400 feet of the center of Interstate 90, and that's where both north, south, where if it goes east and west, then east and west as well. But that would be on both sides. So some of the language was deleted last time where we tried to set a point. Now it is freestanding sign height shall be limited to 90 feet in height as measured from the average elevation of the portion of the principal frontage street abutting the lot. So I have principal highlighted in green just because that was new, but that's something I wanted to highlight to think about some more just because our zoning ordinance uses the term principal inconsistently. So frontage is defined, but principal frontage is not. If you look in various places like the institutional district, house of worship, 1513.2, it talks about one of the principal frontages shall abut upon an arterial or collector street. So that implies that you could have more than one principal frontage. So how do we want, if they say they do have more than, if they are a multi-frontage lot, do we want to let them choose what their principal frontage is for that measurement, or do we need to define it differently? One thing we do define is primary front yard, and that is based on where it is addressed off of. So do you want it to be 90 feet in height as measured from the average elevation of the portion of the primary front yard of, I had it written down here somewhere that made sense. So the portion of the frontage street abutting the primary front yard of its lot. So basically, do you want to give them the option of choosing what their principal frontage is, or do we want to define it by where it's addressed off of?
Would it be easier to just say the average elevation of the yard it's in? So if they want to put their sign in the backyard instead of the front yard, because that faces the interstate, could you just take the average elevation of between point A and point B in the corners of the backyard, and that would establish it? If they want to put it in the front yard, you do the same thing on the front yard. If they want to put it in the side yard, you take the measurement off the property line on the side yard.
My concern with going off of the yard versus the street is if you look at Fleet Farm in Sioux Falls, they have these huge mounds that they put the signs on. Now, I'm not sure if that was grade at one time, and they had the signs on there, and then when they built Fleet Farm, they changed the grade but left the mounds. I'm not sure which way it worked, but what I don't want is a situation where someone's putting huge mounds in the backyard to create grade and going off of that. So that's why Patrick was putting in the street to set a standard so that there isn't something creative in the backyard.
Right, but if you take it off the property line, you can't change the grade on a property line because it's going to impact your neighbors. Whenever you do any grading on a property, you can only go to the edge of your property. You can't, if you want to put a retaining wall up and go up 10 feet or down 10 feet, that has to be on your side of the property line, just like a fence. And so that elevation can never change over time, regardless of what you do internal on the lot. That elevation of the property line is always going to stay.
Unless the developer does something creative before they subdivide.
Yeah.
That's why we're using the street so that, but I think that's.
But I guess my concern is, if you put a sign in your backyard, why should you be restricted to what happens in your front yard, or vice versa if you put it on the side yard? Why would you be limited to something that has no relevance to where the sign is actually located, if it's only based on street frontage? Look at Spelleberg Park, for example. Just think if that was a business and not a city park. That's got a huge grade from east to west side of that parcel. Are you going to restrict the height of their sign if they were putting it on the southwest corner of that property, which is up on a hill, and your street is over on the east side? You wouldn't even be able to put a sign up because there's more than 30 feet of grade change between the elevation at the front of the property and the elevation at that corner where it's going in.
So we're trying to decide where to measure it from, is that what the discussion is? Whether it's the frontage street or the actual lot?
Correct. And that number would apply to both A and B. I just used A as the example, but the same measurement point is in B as well.
Okay, do Megan and Brooks have an opinion on this?
Processing, because before those comments, I was thinking, yeah, and in this application, I don't, and maybe that's a different thing, is where the sign is placed, but I don't want to sort of force businesses in this aspect to put a sign on one side or the other. I don't want, or should I say, I don't want to discourage them from, on the one side of that development, in that plaza, from putting them behind the business on the interstate side. I don't want to somehow discourage them from doing that and have them try to force it onto the front of the lot. But if it's just for the measurement, maybe the placement is different. That's just what the measurement is based off of. So, I'm trying to decide if that works, that that's just what the measurement's based off of. But
What's the definition of principal frontage street?
So there is no definition of principal frontage. We define frontage, just not principal frontage. We define street, of course, but. And that's hard because you have one area that says you can have multiple principal frontage, then other areas, when we talk about front yards, it talks about primary and secondary, and it's a little inconsistent.
When I think of businesses, they're gonna wanna put it on the busy street, regardless of whether that's their front yard or not. I know Brandon doesn't have a lot of areas with grade changes, but I can think of a lot of places like in Rapid City, where the principal street is way different than the elevation at the property line. There's retaining walls, especially as you come off of the interstate, because the streets are ramping up to go over bridges or going down to go under bridges. And so you've got a lot of variation of where the property is up here, the street might be down here, or you got situations like this where the street's going up to an overpass and the property line's down here. And so I don't know why are we restricting what's happening on this property with what's happening out here on the street?
And my concern is not to restrict a business from putting up a sign. My concern is having a situation where someone can do something funky that doesn't look good just to get more height out of their sign. And so if there's a way to address that, so we don't have that issue, that's my concern. I understand where you're coming from, and I appreciate the viewpoint. I just don't know solution, I guess, but I just don't wanna have somebody putting huge mounds that look ridiculous just so they get a taller sign. Cause to your point, if you went from the property line, you could still have the same situation as if you went from the street. You could still, if you average the property lines, you could have a property line that has, then there's a retaining wall and different heights that are there naturally. So I don't know the perfect solution to that. I don't know if we can just say you can't build it up to increase your height. I don't know how you address that.
To some extent, the average elevation would at least de-incentivize that, because even if you built it up, you wouldn't get the full advantage of what you built up. So it might make it less attractive.
We don't currently have any description like this in our regular signage, do we, Patrick? That defines what the height is measured from.
We do not. That's something we talked about. If we made the change here, did we want to apply it to everywhere else? Because right now it's just height above grade.
And we haven't had any issues.
We have not had any mounds built yet. No.
So how does staff interpret that then, with the current signage above grade where the sign is placed?
Yes.
Around here, most developers want to flatten everything out anyway, so I don't know. You get all these nice contoured properties and they go in and flatten them all out.
The other change that is at least made in this draft was the sign height, which I'm sure there could always be an exception, but the 90-foot limit in the draft at this point seems to be pretty forgiving. I suppose there's always a situation where someone's gonna try to tweak it for a few more feet, but to me that might mitigate some concern over somebody really trying to push this. Can never rule that out, but
Patrick, since we're kind of on a stalemate on this, on the first paragraph you talk about, in green you added larger. At this point, we're not allowing larger though, correct? I just want to make sure that we're still at 200.
Correct. So that's kind of in green, just because I wasn't sure if you all wanted to leave that language in there, just so we didn't have to amend it in the future. If you did, Or if you just wanted to take it out now, that's fine too.
Yeah, I guess if we did ever agree to allow larger signs, we could add the word larger. And then, because we would have to put, because right now there's nothing in here that talks about size. Right?
Correct.
This is just height,
Yes.
so there's nothing in here, even though it says larger, there's nothing in here that talks about size. That would have to go back to our standard ordinance definition, correct?
And on the larger thing as well, I don't believe it adds additional freestanding signs either. So maybe it's just within which taller freestanding signs may be erected.
I guess, yeah, maybe just so it doesn't get confusing, I would maybe leave it out, and then if we ever decide to allow more than 200 square feet, then we could add the word larger and put something in here.
Sounds good. This is one of those situations where we want to think about it for a couple of weeks and we'll come back with two different drafts, one that says each, and we'll kind of see what comes out on top.
Isn't there somebody that's interested in a property out there that was looking at a 90-foot sign? Do we need to maybe start this
So
through the process sooner than later?
I believe the developer used the business name, correct? I don't want to
think so.
say, okay. So they're looking at a convenience store. The convenience store had considered a variance to get up to 90 feet. We have not seen that variance. My understanding is that their deal closes on March 2nd, which you would think if it was closing March 2nd, they would have gotten their application in so the variance could have been heard on the 1st, but they did not. So our understanding is they are still coming. For some reason, that sign issue, though, hasn't been raised since then.
I'm okay with moving forward with this if we can just come to an agreement on if we need to be specific about how the height is measured from. And maybe we can do that in our regular ordinance of how that's defined. Because this still needs to comply with the regular component of our ordinance. And so we could get this going through so that that convenience store would not have to submit a variance. Because it always gets iffy about approving a variance and then, well, does it apply to just this? Does it apply to someplace else in town? You know, if we give a variance here, why can't we have it somewhere else in town? It'd be nice to get this in place to avoid that. And then we can deal with how the measurement is addressed in our standard signage section later.
Are we okay with that? Okay. You got enough then?
Did we choose a measurement point, or do we just want to do from grade as is the rest of it, or were you looking to?
I guess what I'm suggesting is we put how it's measured in our standard signage.
Okay.
All we're doing here is changing from 30 to 90.
Okay.
But the how of measuring the starting point of the sign is in our standard ordinance. This is just the exception to go to 90.
Okay. So this one would say freestanding height shall be limited to 90. Freestanding sign, we probably don't need to say height twice, but freestanding sign height shall be limited to 90 feet. And then we will go back later and determine how we measure it. Okay?
So it would, go by our current standard, which is by grade. And if we decide to leave it, we leave it. If we decide to change it, we change it. But that would be in the other section.
Yes, go back, we'll do what we need to do to make sure it applies across the board, whether that has a specific sign height is calculated from X section, or we'll do what we need to do.
Okay, going on to non-conforming signage.
So non-conforming uses are of course difficult to administer just because everyone kind of has an opinion about what they want to do. Signs are a little different than you're expanding a house. Most people want to, you have a face of a sign and people want to replace the face with something new. Like you have a sunshine sign, you'd want to replace it with a Hy-Vee sign. So you would replace the face of the sign. So this just clarifies that they can do that so long as the sign being the new sign replacing the old one is. I think we need to add and dimensions after same size, so it's the same size and dimensions. It doesn't go from 5x2 to 10x1, or if that's what you want to do with the dimensions, but basically you can change out the sign face. This is what this is attempting to clarify. They can't expand it or enlarge it or modify the structure itself, or they can do ordinary repairs and maintenance and replace the sign face.
So if it's smaller than the 200 feet, they couldn't enlarge it to that?
If it was a non-conforming sign, they would be
Oh.
limited to what it was or smaller.
Okay.
So if it was a 50-foot high sign that's 150 square feet, you wouldn't be able to increase it to 200 at that same height.
A clarification amendment.
Okay, so everybody good with that one? Okay, let's go on to freestanding signs.
So, at the variance hearing for the Les Schwab sign, we had a discussion about what exactly 1515.5H6B does with interpretation. There was an interpretative conflict there, and I just ultimately at the staff level, our job is to administer what you all wanted to do. So we're trying to make sure the language, as we did with the last one, we want the intent and the words to do what they are intended to do. So this is kind of based on listening to that meeting. I think grasp kind of the interpretation that you all had, just so it's clear, but I am open to suggested changes. I just want the ordinance to do what you want it to do.
Yeah, from my recollection, I think this does what we discussed. I think I still have some confusion in my mind. Because if I read the first sentence, don't disregard the second sentence. It says one or more signs are permitted, but it says each sign can be 1 square foot per 1 linear feet of frontage, with a total maximum of 200 square feet. It doesn't say 200 square feet combined. So in my mind, if I read just that first sentence, I could put up 2 signs. If I have 200 linear feet of frontage, I could put up 2 or 3 or 4 signs, each 200 square feet.
So my intent in writing it, whether it is what you want or not, is that you, rather than you're limited to a cumulative area per lot total, it allows multiple freestanding signs, assuming you have the frontage to have them. And if you have 200 feet of frontage, each of those signs that you are allowed. So if it's 200 or more feet of frontage, you can have 2 freestanding signs. So yes, you could have 2 that each reach the maximum on the same frontage, assuming it's the limit.
Instead of saying one or more, why don't we say 1 or 2 freestanding signs shall be permitted per lot, as long as each sign does not exceed 1 square foot per 1 foot of, street footage, with a total number of 200 square feet. But you wanna only allow the second sign if there's a second frontage, right?
If it's, the frontage is exceptionally long. You could have 2 frontages of 200 each, and you could have, I guess it would be 201. Oh, 200 or more. So you could have 200 and 200, and you could have 4 signs. Each 200. Conception.
Okay.
I don't know if that's what your intent is or not. I'm just trying to get there.
I guess if someone's got a 500 foot long frontage, I guess my understanding when we first talked about this, if they have 500 linear feet of frontage, whether it's on one street or 2 streets, is that they could have 500 square feet of signage, but no single sign could be more than 200 square feet. So they could have, in the first 200 feet, they could have a 200 square foot sign. In the second 200 feet, they could have another sign. And in the last 100, they could have a third sign. Or if they had 2 frontages of 250 feet, they could put 1 on each frontage. I don't think we should hinder property owners that have large parcels, that they may need to get advertising out to multiple streets. Like Sunshine, for example, they have signage on 2 streets. The bank has signage on 2 streets. I mean, that's why people pay premium for corner lots, is so that they can get visibility on more than one street.
And Patrick, you're saying that they can do that. If you have 2 frontages, you can have 2 signs, and if you're over 200 feet on each of those frontages, you can add a second sign at that rate of 1 foot, 1 square foot per foot of lineal street, up to 200 square feet per sign, right? So you can have.
Correct. You could conceptually, if it was 200, 200 on a corner, you could have 4 signs that are 200 square feet. 2 on each frontage. And whether you wanted to limit it to, you have 1,000 feet of frontage on one if you would want to limit it to 2, or if you would want them to have more. That's just kind of the number if it's 200 or more, but if you wanted to do something about, if you have a incredibly long lot, which Sunshine's lot is pretty massive, allow them more number of signage, or however you want to do it.
Because no matter without thinking about the frontage, or the amount, the lineal length of footage per frontage, you could have 1 sign per frontage. So as a starter. based on a very large, or a lot with a lot of lineal street frontage. But a smaller business with two frontages would be limited to two if they didn't have the length or the street front. Oh, and then this does limit to two per street frontage, but that's only when you have 200 feet or more, okay?
So if you have 300 feet, you could have 300 square feet of signage in two signs. So you can do 150, 150, 200, 100, however you wanted to do that.
This language caps you out at 200 square feet per sign. Right, I think, right? Hopefully. Maybe I'm wrong on what I wrote. Sentence exceedable. With a total maximum of 200 square feet for each sign.
As I read it, it still maxes us out at 200 for the entire lot.
We can start from scratch. What are the bullet points you would like the language to hit?
A freestanding sign is allowed up to 200 square feet on, and a second, or is allowed on lots with under 200 feet of frontage. A second sign is allowed for businesses with over 200 feet of frontage. And streets with two frontage do the same thing on that second frontage, however you want to say that. I think what you're going for is fine. I just think, I think you do need to start over, but the same calculation, the 1 foot per 1 foot of linear frontage.
Do you still want there to be a cap
I think
Per
that
sign.
on the, per sign?
for 200,
Okay.
200 square feet is still the cap.
Do we want to limit it to one sign? I guess I see applications where you got a long strip all of businesses. And they share, a common parking lot along the front, but they have small monument signs out in front.
57th Street's a good example.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm thinking. I don't know if those are individual properties or if those are one large property, but that's what I'm thinking of is 57th Street, where you got a small monument sign out in front of each of the business owners rather than one tall monumental sign for the whole length of it. Yeah, they all look the same. The only thing that's different is the sign. Yep. But here again, I don't know if those are individual parcels or if those are one parcel. But
They appear to be individuals. It's on the screen behind you as well. It looks like they are laddered off.
But something like that could be one parcel
Correct.
and with signage laid out individually like that. To me, that would be a much less obtrusive situation than, large 200 square foot signs.
And you could still, because those are probably 50-foot lots or something like that, so maybe not even. And they are.
big guy is
Yeah.
80-ish.
So they're 50 to 80 or whatever. So if you, in that case, you'd get a 50-foot. If you did the 1 foot per 1 foot, you'd get a 50-foot sign. So why would someone? Your point is, why would someone be looked at differently if it was owned by one? It was one parcel. It still functioned the same. It's just owned differently. Why would they have individual signs when if it was one parcel, they would be forced to have it in one sign? I kind of see that. So we could kind of do the same calculation then that we do on attached signs, where you can have as many signs as you want. They just are capped out at the total.
Then we'd have to go back to a maximum per lot, which.
But you can still have the 200 square foot maximum until you get, well, it'd be 1 foot per 1 foot, and once you get over 200, we're saying here that you can go up to 400 square feet of signage in 2 different signs. So your one sign would be capped out at 200, but that's how our wall signs are too. They're capped out at 200, so it'd be kind of the same thing.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. If you've got, like you said, if you got 400 feet of frontage, you could have 2 signs of 200 square feet. But you couldn't have one sign of 300. So that any one sign can't be any bigger than 200.
But you can have 4 signs if you wanted to.
4 100, yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And that would, personalize each individual unit a little bit. If you had, a 400-foot long building, you could have your signs kind of outlying each business more than just one big sign, and then you pull in there and you have to try to figure out where you're supposed to go. So you could outline the individual businesses better probably with that, and you'd still be limiting the total square footage.
So are we kind of saying, okay, I don't want to get this too but what I'm struggling with is we're still going to have, we're still talking about a maximum total signage per frontage. It's just a choice how they would divide that up. Because what I don't want to end up with is a place with many businesses and to have 7 200-foot signs.
Well,
So-
you'd still be limited by the 1 foot of signage, square foot per foot of frontage. So if you had a 100-foot wide lot, you'd have 100 feet of signage. And if you had a 400-foot long lot, you'd have 400 square feet of signage. But what Brian's kind of saying is take out that first sentence where it says 1 or more freestanding signs shall be permitted. We're not limiting the number of signs, we're limiting the square footage of signs. So you'd still have the 200 square foot, for a 200 square foot lot, but do we want to limit that? In here, we're kind of saying you could have 2 signs for 400 foot long, or we don't have a maximum of, so if it's a 500 foot long lot, we're limiting it at 2 200 square foot signs. I think we still want to limit the single sign of 200 square feet. I think we want to limit that. And do we want to limit now? If it, to Brian's point, if it's 1,000 square foot long lot, do we want to limit that to 400, or do we stay with that maximum individual sign of 200, but you could go up to 1,000 square footage of signage?
The other thing we'd need to be careful of is, take an example like Quick Start. they have 3 frontages. So if, say each of those frontages is 200 square feet, so they have 600 feet of frontage, we don't want 3 200 square foot signs on one side of the building.
I think we would
So I
want,
think we would
limit
need to
it.
include something to space the signs out, or on the frontage that the dimensions are taken from, so that we're not clustering 2 or 3 or more signs all in one spot, that we're distributing them out evenly on the frontage that those calcs were taken from.
or limit the calculations to 2 frontages. Because I think that would, I mean, in Quickstarter's example, yeah, they have 3 frontages, but they're not advertising to the back one. They
Yeah.
could use it for their calculation if we allowed them, but I think two frontages is sufficient.
Yeah, if you got a business with a very narrow front lot, and they want to, cheat the system by taking their frontage off the back lot, but they're not putting any of the advertising back there, to me, that's not the intent. So if there's a way to limit the spacing, or put a restriction on the spacing between the signs.
Okay, Patrick, you got all that?
I think so. I will go back through and we probably listen to the recording a few times, and we'll come back with a new draft, and we'll toss out the language that exists and start from scratch, and hopefully get closer.
All right, let's go on to non-conforming use regulations on 38.
So back to non-conforming uses. They are a thing that consistently comes up that people want to do that's difficult to administer. So this kind of breaks it out a little more. The big thing is for you all, what do you consider ordinary repairs and maintenance? We have a lot of applications that come in, of course, replacing roofing, siding, windows. Those are kind of easy. It doesn't structurally alter anything. The big one that comes in a lot of times is someone has a deck that was built in the setback. It is now non-conforming. Of course, they want to replace that deck. If you can't destroy more than 50% of the structure at once, you get a building permit for 49%, then 49%, and 2%. No one ever builds a deck like that. So really, they get 3 building permits and just do the thing. We're just trying to. That doesn't necessarily make sense to do it that way. Even though it technically works, I don't believe that's the intent. So we're just trying to figure out, what do you consider ordinary repairs and maintenance, so we can avoid all that shenanigans and just have it be clear. And some we had one that came in, his driveway paving, of course, was up to into the side yard setback, and he wanted to replace it. And well, if you rip up pavement, then you're obviously destroying it more than 50%, so you can't. Is that something you would want to allow? So we're just trying to make sure that, again, that what staff is doing reflects your intent.
Well, if they're trying to upgrade their property, it doesn't seem fair that they would have to make things smaller. If they're trying to upgrade things, not make it bigger, but shouldn't they be able to have the same size? I mean, I know what you're saying, but from a practical perspective, who's going to want that?
And unlike a deck or something, do you really want to have somebody not replace a deck that needs to be replaced? I mean, yeah. And we're allowing it anyway. We're just allowing them to do it through the process. The paving thing, I'm not sure what the situation is there. I don't know. If it's
But again, if it's broken up and they're going to replace it to make it look better.
I think that situation was, Paul can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was a it was an older house, so it was a one stall garage. It was a narrower lot. So they had pavement that extended out into the side yard setback as a way of, if the passenger steps out of the car, they're not stepping onto grass or mud or whatever's there. Because it was older garages tend to be smaller than newer garages because now we have big trucks that are 20 feet long and as wide as a highway lane, and older cars are smaller, and it was designed for that.
Well, I don't know if everybody on, that sits here now was here, but I remember we had a freestanding garage that was, I think, 4 feet off the setback, 4 or 5 feet, I don't remember. It wasn't 7, and they wanted to do an addition to the house, and in the addition attach the garage. So that, I don't know, Paul, do you remember that one? It was up by the water tower, if I remember right, somewhere by the water tower east of the high school, or west of the high school there. And we didn't allow that, if I remember correctly, because it would have made the garage, it would have made it basically non-conforming. That's a situation that was really tough, so.
I think I do remember that, and so the attachment part of it basically made the whole house non-conforming. Because it now was, it made it one structure and put the whole. I mean, I think the approach is an attempt to take